Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gosztola, and welcome to the Dissenter Weekly. It's September 23rd, and I've got several top whistleblower stories for you this week. But first, I'm here with my partner, Brian Nam-Sonenstein, who is going to be helping me through these stories, and he's got some housekeeping items for you before we get going.
Hey, Kevin. Good to be with you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Got some great stories that Kevin has prepared for today. But before we dive in, just your regular reminder to make sure that you're following wherever you're watching right now so that you can keep up with the show every week at Thursdays at 4 p.m. East. And we are 100% supported by readers and watchers and listeners like you. So if you want to make sure that the show keeps going, if you want to chip in to fund Kevin's journalism, and the journalism that we publish by all sorts of other wonderful freelance contributors at the site, you can go to shadowproof.com/donate, or you can support Kevin's newsletter, thedissenter.org, which we will talk about at the end of the show here. Without further ado, Kevin, why don't you bring us into our first story here?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So the first story here is breaking news for September 23rd. It's been leading. It is partly due to the mass deportations of Haitian refugees. That's the main catalyst. But we have that the U.S. Ambassador to Haiti has resigned in protest over, well, as I said, partly because of the mass deportations. This envoy, Daniel Foote, was appointed in July, and he released a statement protesting, in general, almost all of the policy that the U.S. government has toward Haiti. He is essentially blowing the whistle, saying he wrote, "I will not be associated with the United States' inhumane, counterproductive decision to deport thousands of Haitian refugees and illegal immigrants to Haiti, a country where American officials are confined to secure compounds because of the danger posed by armed gangs in control of daily life. Our policy approach to Haiti remains deeply flawed, and my recommendations have been ignored and dismissed when not edited to project a narrative different from my own." He went on to add that the people of Haiti, mired in poverty, hostage to the terror, kidnappings, robberies, and massacres of armed gangs, and suffering under a corrupt government with gang alliances, simply cannot support the forced infusion of thousands of returned migrants lacking food, shelter, and money without additional avoidable human tragedy. And he says that the need for humanitarian assistance and funds to deliver COVID vaccines is crucial. They also need a true agreement with international support for the, quote, democratic selection of their next president and parliament, end quote. Haitians want to chart their own course, he says, without international puppeteering and favored candidates, and that should be the path to achieving stability in the country. However, the Biden administration issued another statement of support, so-called statement of support, for the unelected de facto Prime Minister, Dr. Ariel Henry, and for touting his political agreement over another more broader, earlier accord that's been put together by organizations and civil society in Haiti. So Daniel Foote says that the hubris that makes us believe we should pick the winner again is impressive. The cycle of international political interventions in Haiti has consistently produced catastrophic results. More negative impacts to Haiti will have calamitous consequences, not only in Haiti, but in the U.S. and our neighbors in the hemisphere. From the Miami Herald, an unnamed official essentially said that the problem with Foote is that he was seeking a broader mandate and oversight responsibilities, which we did not think was appropriate or prudent at the time. So he submitted his resignation. But in other words, he's been calling out the entirety of the policy internally and as met roadblock after roadblock, it appears. So that's why we are seeing this resignation. And there's a lot that has unfolded in the country. His appointment came after Haitian Prime Minister Jovenel Moïse was assassinated. And actually, the prime minister who is backed by the Biden administration right now, who is getting some support. His fingerprints, and he seems to have links to some of the men who are implicated in that assassination plot. So there's that unfolding. While there are low COVID-19 vaccination rates, there's a deadly earthquake that occurred in August. That devastation continues to have ramifications for people in Haiti. And yet the State Department thinks that they can't give him too much of bandwidth to do what he would like in response to the numerous crises within Haiti. So it's clear that he wanted a different course. I recognize in the statement that while he is blowing a whistle on the entirety of the policy, one thing we probably would quibble with over here is that he wants a law enforcement or a sort of law and order approach to taking on the crises in Haiti. He emphasizes the need to train police forces in Haiti, and I don't know if that would be the solution we would prescribe. It seems like if you can address the poverty and deal with these crises and just basically allow democracy to happen, like he's saying, the hubris of picking winners and making sure that certain winners end up losers, or you can go back to Aristide in 2004 when George W. Bush was president and backed a coup that led to deposing Jean-Bertrand Aristide. That is obviously why there is such instability in Haiti, is at any time they pursue democracy and it breaks out independent from what the U.S. government wants, those people find themselves crushed. And so, these policies, these many policies, are why we see these crises. And it's worth noting today, as one, we see that the Biden administration is going with replacing the horses as the solution to the problem, as if the horses were what was racist about the policy of deporting en masse Haitian refugees. But we're also seeing this response to the potential for using Guantanamo Bay military camp as a site for bringing Haitians. And everyone's outraged, but sadly, the outrage shouldn't be that they would turn around and use this military camp that has become notorious. I mean, the outrage should be that they might repeat a policy that was utilized in the 1990s, because, in fact, we have held Haitians at this Guantanamo military base beforehand, and that was not something that was commendable on the part of the United States. There are aspects of that left quite a stain. So this is where we are, and I think Daniel Foote is someone who is honorable for stepping aside and saying that the Biden administration fundamentally has a totally wrong, if not incomprehensible, policy towards Haiti.
Thank you, Kevin. That was a very wonderful overview of an incredibly tragic story that we are continuing to watch unfold, and we'll keep an eye on it. I appreciate you working on that. Next up, we have nursing home whistleblower in Minnesota sues over alleged retaliation. Walk us through this one.
So this story comes from the good, hardworking people over at Whistleblower Network News, and they have this report from the summary of the Minneapolis Star Tribune about a nursing home that's called St. Therese of New Hope. It's in Minnesota. And so the nursing home whistleblower, Brooke Peebles, has alleged in a lawsuit that, quote, top executives at the 258-bed nursing home told employees to, quote, ignore and violate state and federal guidelines governing visitations and the quarantine of newly admitted patients, even after more than 60 people who lived at the facility died from the coronavirus, end quote. And she contends that management took a lax approach to the virus. Allegedly, the parent of one of the managers at St. Therese was allowed into the nursing home, but did not follow federal quarantine guidelines. So it's uncertain as to who was exposed if anyone was exposed. She said she was fired less than a month after she warned her superiors that the nursing home was putting patients and staff in danger. She believes that management falsely told her she was fired because of her lack of leadership abilities. And that doesn't make any sense because she can point to glowing performance reviews that go back to 2017. So clearly something else was going on. And prior to the pandemic, St. Therese was cited for health and safety violations that came as a result of a 2018 inspection. There was a February 2020 inspection just before the pandemic that found more violations, things like failing to follow proper hand washing and glove usage, or to failing to follow other hygiene protocols. And while there have been some reporting that reflects that the nursing home did take COVID-19 protocol seriously at the facility, just the mere fact that somebody would have been fired for raising concerns about how things were being managed at the nursing home is troubling. And we know from what happened with nursing homes in New York City that we can presume, or in the wider state of New York, that we could presume that this was something that happened in all 50 states to some degree of relaxing of guidelines in ways that may have been understandable because they wanted to allow older Americans to be able to have access to their family, not be lonely, but also put people's lives at risk, the risk of certain people. And if management was letting people in while prohibiting visitors for those in the nursing home, then that double standard is one that is quite hazardous as well. So we'll keep tabs on this and figure out if we find out that the nursing home whistleblower, Brooke Peoples, had her claim validated, we'll certainly have an update at the Dissenter Weekly.
Thank you, Kevin. Let's turn our attention to Texas, where the Attorney General believes he's immune from the state's whistleblower law. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. The law does not seem to apply, or he does not want it to apply. And his name is Ken Paxton. We have covered this just a little bit, but and so it hasn't gone entirely unnoticed, but the state is allowing, obviously we're doing the story while the state is allowing random people all over the country to sue abortion doctors if they have given medical care to women who need certain procedures. But with that said, Ken Paxton says he should be immune to the state whistleblower law because in his view, and this is the argument being put forward, they believe it does not cover elected officials. So that's why he should not be faced with a whistleblower lawsuit related to alleged bribery and interference in criminal investigations. The state's Solicitor General, who is defending Paxton, has argued that the Texas Whistleblower Act only allows claims based on misconduct by public employees, appointed officials, or the government entities that employed whistleblowers. That's according to Courthouse News's coverage of this. In fact, Paxton believes that immunity covers all elected officials in Texas. So city council members, school board members, and any elected person in the county government, state legislature, or the Supreme Court. Though the idea that this law would exempt all those people and a state legislature would pass it, even a right-wing one, is not believable because, it's not like Republicans wouldn't want to have this to go after Democrats if they lost control of the state of Texas. So that's not beyond the possibility. There have been Democrats that have run the state of Texas before, even if it's a totally right-wing state politically. The Texas Tribune then reported on the appellate court hearing in which the judges heard these baffling arguments. And one of the justices, Gisela D. Triana, questioned the Solicitor General's argument that all elected officials are exempt from the whistleblower law. And the Chief Justice, Darlene Byrne, asked whether the interpretation would give the Texas Supreme Court Texas Supreme Court justices immunity from sexual harassment claims that were brought by employees. And Stone said employees filing so Stone is the Solicitor General. The response was that their claims would have other avenues for relief outside the whistleblower law, but the Attorney General, as an elected official, could not be sued under the law, which covers public employees, appointed officials, and government entities. So sticking to what they're saying. I don't think any of this will be that persuasive to the appellate court, and I think it's only a matter of time before we see this court call bullshit on what Ken Paxton is trying to do. He doesn't strike me as someone who is taken all that seriously, probably, by the judicial system. I'm not sure that people who are on these courts, especially if they're the Democrats, have any faith in the stability of what Ken Paxton is trying to do. It's pretty clear that he's a criminal who is biding his time until eventually someone might succeed in indicting him for criminal offenses that he's committed before, during, or while he's been, or likely to continue committing if he even loses as Attorney General. It seems like he's willing to engage in a whole swath of conduct that is not legal in states.
Thank you, Kevin. EPA whistleblower faces unproven claims of racism and abuse at hearing. Walk us through this story.
So, I'll just say that this is my interpretation of what I'm reading that came from E&E News, and they did some good coverage of a hearing before. That's part of something called the Merit Systems Protection Board. They have these administrative hearings where whistleblowers go through, and Ruth Etzel, we covered Ruth Etzel, this EPA whistleblower, last week on the Dissenter Weekly, who's had a hearing before to challenge the retaliation and the way she was fired from the EPA. And President Joe Biden's administration has decided to defend the firing, which took place in 2018 under President Donald Trump. And this was when corporate lobbyists in control were put in control of environmental protection policies. And it appears that these lobbyists are still in control if the Biden administration are not willing to go back and reinstate Etzel into her job. And so what they're doing is basically continuing a kind of devious, sinister way of forcing her out that was set in motion a couple of years ago. And so Etzel warned that there was lead contamination that could make children sick. That's what she says. And that is why she believes she was forced out. But they're saying she was forced out because of racism and the fact that she was creating a hostile work environment for people of color at the division in which she worked, which was the Office of Children's Health Protection in the EPA. And the claims are coming from African-American women, again, will make it extra difficult for her to combat. And they are saying they were not given equal opportunities for professional development. But the key and the reason why I am not taking what they say at face value is because an acting deputy chief of staff who initially put Etzel on leave and demoted her investigated the complaints and did not find, quote, sufficient evidence to substantiate the allegations, end quote. So the problems of diversity or racism in the EPA are existent, but they're not problems that could be solely attributed to Ruth Etzel. And that's what you see in this piece from E&E. And the statement was given to E&E by Etzel, and it is as follows. This is a textbook example of what happens to people who speak truth to power. EPA dredged up old, unsubstantiated allegations to smear me. The record is clear that I vigorously supported opportunities and career advancement for the many African Americans who worked with me. I will continue to raise my voice to protect children's health, regardless of the personal consequences. And there are emails that reflect, which we talked about in the prior week. One of them say that it's time to move on Ruth Etzel. It reflects a policy that Ruth characterizes as, instead of attacking the science, the EPA has now moved to destroying the scientists in order to ultimately maintain this corporate capture of divisions of the agency. And as we've talked about, this is all related to the chemical risk assessments scandal that has received very little attention, with half dozen or so EPA whistleblowers coming forward and describing how their work was altered, or they were forced to alter their work, or the assessments that they wanted submitted were not accepted. They were rejected by parts of the age, basically this division that manages these chemical risks, because they did not match what the chemical industry wanted the EPA to do when it came to the labeling of these hazardous chemicals. In other words, the fact that they were going to go forward and ask that the EPA actually regulate the chemicals was the thing that led their work to be obstructed within the EPA. And though that's what Ruth Etzel was a part, and that's why she's trying to get her job back, to say, that I was trying to take care of children and I deserve to have my job reinstated because I wasn't doing anything that deserved this kind of retaliation.
Thank you, Kevin. Our next story here: FinCEN files whistleblower imprisoned while reforms that she sparked are implemented. Talk to us about this one.
So the FinCEN files whistleblower, her name is Natalie Mayflower Sauer Edwards. She's in prison right now in West Virginia, a federal prison, serving a 6-month sentence. This is something we covered last week as well. So this falls into the category of being an update. And if we go back to September 2020, this is when this all happened. The International Consortium of Investigative Journalists and Jason Leopold for BuzzFeed, along with more than 100 other media outlets, I believe globally, got together to work on contents from these FinCEN files. And FinCEN is this financial crimes enforcement network within the U.S. Treasury Department. And they looked at these files, which she passed on a couple of years ago, back in 2018, and they reflected the money laundering that was going on throughout the globe and the role that United States banks are playing in allowing this dirty money to continue to flow through the global financial system. So as we sit here today, there are changes that have been implemented. The United Kingdom and the European Union, as well as the United States, have pursued policy changes. The United States passed a Corporate Transparency Act in Congress. This is supposed to establish a, quote, corporate registry that will record the real owners behind all companies registered in the United States, effectively ending the use of secretive shell companies in the country. That's according to the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. But, even as this happens, the Biden administration is maintaining that what Edwards did was a crime and that she should be in prison. The Justice Department is continuing to take that position. The Treasury Department's FinCEN division is working on these new regulations, and the Biden administration sees this as a big enough problem to throw $64 million additional dollars at developing the registry. And even though the legislation that has passed was somewhat neutered by corporate lobbyists, which is always the case in our government, it's still something that is being done to address what was exposed by Edwards. And yet, again, she is there. She was prosecuted like she violated the Espionage Act, but she wasn't punished under the Espionage Act. They went after her for talking to reporters, for having these communications with Jason Leopold. Jason Leopold was the journalist she went to. So they note, ICIJ, while the new legislation includes greater rewards for whistleblowers bringing inside information to the government, in other words, I think this Corporate Transparency Act had some kind of a provision for whistleblowers, if I'm reading the coverage from this consortium correctly. While there are greater rewards for whistleblowers, penalties for taking information public through the media are more than twice as harsh as the penalties for failing to disclose a company in the first place. So, in other words, the theme here is that people who are engaged in money laundering will be able to get away with it and suffer less penalty than if you go to someone who's in journalism and expose how the US government and its agencies are failing to police or crack down on money launderers. And I guess this is a theme here at the Dissenter Weekly of constantly raising this dynamic of the people who blow the whistle, who have the hammer brought down on them. And then Congress says, well, this is a significant problem. These are issues. They do something modest to deal with the problem. It doesn't totally erase it, but it makes a little tiny dent. But then that whistleblower is never made whole. And they continue to find that they are isolated in society.
Thank you, Kevin. Our last story on here for today, before we talk about the Dissenter and everything else we got going on, we have the Assange extradition case has cost the British public over £300,000. Talk to us about this one.
Yeah, and the conversion for you in the United States is that this would be over $400,000 in expenses. This story comes from Declassified UK, as I give credit, is we give credit in the Chiron there. This case has no reason to be continuing. And as the Declassified UK reporter Phil highlights, the costs are stacking considerably. Phil goes through all the different figures. I'll break some of them down. We've done a lot of coverage of the Assange case at the Dissenter Weekly. And so the Crown Prosecution Service, as viewers may know, they are the ones tasked with working on the Assange case, and they are asked to succeed in winning the extradition case so that Julian Assange can be brought to the United States and put on trial, which the Justice Department would take over, and they'd then be in control. So there has been $151,000 on barristers spent by the Crown Prosecution Service. There's been 22,000 pounds. Sorry, I think I might have said dollars. It's pounds. 22,000 pounds on expert witnesses. We've seen 5,000 pounds on transcripts, and all of this just adds up fairly quickly. Then there's the amount spent on keeping Julian Assange confined in Belmarsh prison, something that they shouldn't have to be paying for, and they shouldn't be doing. It's obscene that he continues to be in jail while he's awaiting this appeal hearing, which is coming at the end of October. But it costs about £58,000 per prisoner each year, according to the Ministry of Justice. Then there's £23 that likely has gone to paying Judge Vanessa Baretzer. She was the district judge. Then we've got magistrate courts case costs that average £1,150 per day. So yes, that comes out to £317,000. And then the people at Declassified were good for us Americans and converted that to $433,500. So I didn't have to quickly do that during the show today. So thank you, Declassified UK and Phil Miller, for that. So all of this is, so it's nearly a half $500,000 that has been spent on prosecuting Assange. Now, good question is, how much money has been spent by the Justice Department up to this point on the Assange extradition case? I think that's worth trying to uncover. Anyone who has the ability to figure that out, if we had a functioning establishment news media, perhaps they would be using their access to sources within the Justice Department to provide that information to the public. Most of the editorial boards of all of these organizations have said something negative. They have not taken the side of the Justice Department when it comes to this case. But with that said, they're not doing a whole lot of journalism on why the Justice Department and the Biden administration are continuing this after Trump's administration. So, we're left in the dark. But the costs would go back to 2010. There's been costs accrued going back to the WikiLeaks grand jury. And I imagine that millions, if not tens of millions of dollars potentially have been spent going after Julian Assange, including things like having, I remember that the Snowden documents had something called a manhunting timeline to go after Julian Assange. And so when you factor in the intelligence apparatus and their interest and the resources expended to track and follow Julian Assange, and then you add in the Justice Department and the efforts to prosecute, I imagine we probably get several $1 million in expenses just on going after someone who is the editor-in-chief of an online media organization and someone who is a journalist. So, of course, the British government, the representative who commented on this, said that they have a legal obligation to assist, advise, and conduct all the extradition proceedings on behalf of foreign authorities. That's what the Crown Prosecution Service said about the costs. But, it's really up to the people of Britain to decide if this is the kind of money they want to be spending. And they could lobby their government to no longer allow this to go forward. There are extradition cases that don't proceed because governments decide that they don't want to support them. Just because you have the treaty doesn't mean they get to extradite every single person that they want. And then, the U.S. government will put its foot down and tell the United Kingdom that they can't have certain people. So I think that. So anyways, thanks to Declassified UK for doing this kind of journalism. It's really crucial. And I don't have much more to say. I think that's basically all. That's the update for Julian Assange. There isn't anything else to add beyond, again, emphasizing that in a month, we're going to have that appeal hearing. And so there will be some reporting in the run up to that hearing that builds toward it, so people have a full understanding of the stakes and what is at play as far as the different arguments. I know consistently people will ask, what about the fact that the FBI has this source or this informant that they're working, who's a pedophile, Ziggy Tordarson, who's now been recorded by this Icelandic media organization. And we know from the outlet, it's called Stunden, and Bjartmar Anderson did the interviewing of Ziggy. We know that he's not a credible person. So he fabricated and all of the things that are related to the hacking offense or the computer crime offense, those should all be tossed out. So people wonder the fact that this person's involved, what's that going to mean for the extradition? And unfortunately, it means that not a lot, because that's not really what is within the scope of the appeal hearing. So we'll be doing further reporting on the upcoming appeal hearing, just so we can clarify and make sure people know what is going on there. And to make clear that there are some things that are not going to be left alone, because the Assange legal team does want to challenge at some point, if they can, what took place at the district court level to go after Julian Assange and say that he was not a journalist and that he did not have press freedom. But that's going to be for another hearing further on down the road. In the meantime, they're going to be focused on the U.S. government's appeals that are about those smaller issues, but still important issues that led to the U.S. Vanessa Barretzer rejecting the U.S. request for extradition. And I'm seeing people who are leaving some comments. So as we conclude or come to the end of the show, just thank you to the people who are here every week to tune in and watch this. It's really good to see you. And so let's put the Dissenter URL up for everyone. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. So
yeah, sure.
I got a little bit of extracurricular entertainment, although this is coming from a whistleblower, but I find this to be very amusing. And last week we played a clip from Alexander Vinman, who's the person who's been called the Ukraine call whistleblower. And I was a little like meh on him. I treated him like a partisan whistleblower when it came to the Democratic Party, but he's starting to prove to be a pretty principled person. And so last week, I believe we showed the clip of him going on CNN and saying that Milley, the general, should resign because he was taking matters into his own hands with China and doing it on the auspices of stopping Trump from starting, I guess, a world war or nuclear strike or whatever, which again is serious. But if he was concerned, he should have gone to Congress and had and gotten them involved to deal with it rather than the military unilaterally acting, because the military is supposed to answer to civilians, and that's what Vinman said. And so now this week, there's this interview that was put up by James Risen at The Intercept that shoots down another part of liberal Russiagate hysteria. And I just want people to be able to watch this and enjoy it. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did.
You know, before we get to the phone call, one of the more intriguing things that you mentioned in the book is about the Helsinki meeting with Putin. And you say, you kind of recount how the only person in the room was the interpreter, or from the American side. But you also say that you knew the interpreter. And so I'm asking, did you ever find out what they really said in that meeting? Did you ever ask the interpreter, what did Trump really say to Putin?
I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but I had no real deep concerns about what was said in that meeting behind closed doors. I think, frankly, in a lot of ways, there's the meeting up until the president's public press conference with Vladimir Putin. That was fairly well executed with a lot of staff, making sure that the discussions continue to advance U.S. national security interests. And it was really that show at the end that blew up the whole Helsinki meeting. And my first day on the job was Helsinki, and this is by my own would say interactions with people that were in the room. I have relatively decent confidence that there were no kind of machinations that upset U.S. national security interests. They didn't advance them either, but they didn't, they weren't catastrophic.
So that's a clip. And I don't know if you remember this event in Trump lore, but it became a defining moment. And we had headlines that I'm looking over from back then that were just took things to the highest level of like DEFCON 5, really, of like Trump sides with Russia against FBI. He bows to Putin. Trump sides with Putin. You had people putting out all kinds of things about what would have happened in the meeting. James Risen, included, and so things like Putin. That Trump was Putin's poodle. Trump's Helsinki humiliation. What did Trump and Putin agree on? Brookings Institution was like, this is not normal. Again, everyone was making a big deal out of it. But Vinman is saying that it's really nothing, and it shouldn't be anything that we pay much interest into. And so we're beginning to see that all of this is unraveling, and I'll save it for another show. But we are seeing that the Democratic National Committee was involved in putting together a lot of the narrative that is based fundamentally on lies about the extent to which there were connections between Trump and Russia. And so that's all really ultimately good. And remember, these people, the Democrats, were the ones who were telling the public that the Podesta emails published by WikiLeaks, by Julian Assange, were forgeries at first, and then it didn't work. So they said those have to have come from Russia. And so anybody who's reading them is helping Russia elect Donald Trump. And that's so that people didn't look at their contents and see exactly what the Hillary Clinton campaign was up to, what the DNC was up to against Bernie Sanders. And there were things reflecting the way that John Podesta was involved in that Clinton campaign. And now today, as we record this show, he's the one who is fed up with progressives who are taking a rare and unusual stand, demanding that both the reconciliation bill and the infrastructure bill pass at the same time through Congress, and that they don't get separated, because then that will mean that they have less leverage to make sure their reconciliation bill is strong. You got John Podesta trying to weaken everything against the working people and in service to the wealthy and corporate classes of the United States. So just to say that it brings me great appreciation and joy to see that some of these things are just falling to complete pieces, and right before our very eyes. In some of these media programs, you know, these journalists are asking questions, hoping they're going to get an answer, and getting something else entirely that defies the narrative. So with that said, this is the newsletter, the Dissenter.org. If you subscribe, we're doing a retrospective 20 years after 9/11. There's a number of organizations that are engaged in it, but I think it's really important to look back and to go back and really explore those first years after 9/11. There's a 9/11 cinema series that I'm publishing. I'll have the next commentary up tomorrow. The one that I did on Black Hawk Down had a really good response. So thank you to people who engaged with what was written and documented through that piece. And there is I want to plug before the month starts, because next week, we'll be talking to you before the month is up. But coming up in October, there's actually a War on Terror film festival that is being put together by the they're called the let me get the name correctly. I don't want to botch it. But the organization that is sponsoring it is called I believe the Coalition for Civil Freedoms. Samuel Arian is affiliated with it. He is a political prisoner in the United States. And I recently did a panel with him for defending rights and dissent on the war on terror at home. But this organization, Coalition for Civil Freedoms, doing this festival with the Center for Constitutional Rights, United Voices for America, Code Pink, Cage, Peace Action, and some other organizations. And they put together a full slate of independent films, documentaries, and some more mainstream films that covered the war on terrorism. And I think you're all going to enjoy them. If you go to WOTfilmfestival.com, WOTfilmfestival.com, you can register, and then they're going to screen at no cost virtually. So there'll be some link. So the filmmakers have given them permission to stream these online. And then I imagine there's going to be discussions after them. There's a calendar. It's taking place all throughout the month of October. I'm looking forward to engaging with some of their screenings. So with that said, I don't have anything else. Is there anything you want to put out there, Brian, before we wrap the show?
No, not a whole lot. We are just wrapping up this year's Marvel Cook submissions. We have 2 left to publish from some comrades on the inside. We have a couple other freelance pieces outside of that I'm excited to get through the pipeline to all of you. And yeah, other than that, just really appreciate everybody's support, well wishes, the wonderful feedback, everybody joining us here and commenting. Just really appreciate it. So yeah, Kev, I don't know if you have anything else, but I can round it out.
We'll be back next week.
Yeah, we will be back next week. Same time, same channel, Thursdays at 4:00. Like I said, please make sure that you're following us. And if you subscribe to us on YouTube, you'll get a nice little notification when we start the show. And yeah, again, if you want to support us, you could tell a friend, and help spread the word about Shadowproof. Word of mouth is very important to getting readers to our site. So that's a great way to help. But if you can donate a couple dollars, that also goes a long way. We use that money to pay writers to keep the website online. And you can do that at shadowproof.com/donate or right here, thedissenter.org, and get access to Kevin's wonderful newsletter. So that being said,
just many of the articles have tip jars. So if you don't want to become a subscriber and have the commitment, you just throw a couple bucks, and then you don't have to, we have to be tied to us.
Absolutely. Yeah. And at shadowproof.com/donate, we similarly have one-time options. You could also mail us a check the old-fashioned way. We'll take your money. Trust me. So with that being said, thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Kevin, for all the hard work you put into the show and to the newsletter and to Shadowproof. And we will talk to you all next week.